familiar with the color code, I am a blue, and blues are core focus. I'm driven by intimacy, and so I need people to see me in a specific way. And because of that, I oftentimes lose myself in that process, and we can talk about that later. But I had an experience with a boyfriend who I dated for 3 years that I lost myself in that situation because I wanted him to see me in a specific way that I didn't share certain parts of him with me, and it was very destructive. Luckily, it's 10 years later and things are a ton better. But when we get into this box, again, we need to be really well thought of, right? Have any of you ever felt that way? And sometimes it's a good thing. We like to be brought up, but it's when we cross that line and we cross that road into that the deception part. We view others as judgmental, as always watching us. We feel often anxious, very needy and stressed. I'm in these worlds, these realms quite often. And then we view the world as very dangerous, right? They're always watching me, they're always judging me. What harm comes from this, from being in this box?
Self-conscious.
Self-conscious? Yes.
Never yourself.
Yeah, you're never yourself.
I think this is like all teenagers.
Absolutely.
basically. The world revolves around them. It's kind of selfish.
Yeah, it is selfish because that's great. We're so consumed with ourselves and being seen a specific way that we're not willing to be vulnerable, right? And I'm sure you guys have talked about vulnerability in here, but when we lack vulnerability, we don't let people in. So thank you for bringing that up.
Would this be a stage of someone that always needs to please other people as well?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Did you guys hear that?
I didn't actually.
People pleaser.
He asked if this was a stage where, people are in this to please people, which is a good thing, but sometimes if we're so consumed with looking outwardly, it doesn't help ourselves. So the good news is, we don't always have to have a heart of war, and we don't have to be inside our justification boxes. We can gain a heart of peace. How many of you want to be there right now? I know John does, fishing, right? Or someplace similar, right? Maybe Hawaii. So I've got another video, and he's going to talk about what it could potentially look like in our relationships when our heart's at peace with others, and we actually see others as people.
People who have been major influences for good in my life and what they have meant to me. Who in your life has been that? Now, I typically think about my father-in-law. I mentioned him earlier today when Amber was teaching. The story we retell in the book, The Anatomy of Peace, was his story. He was not quite 15 years old in 1952, and at this time in his life, his dad was working in Zion National Park. And they had a cabin right outside the park as you're going down in a little town there called Springdale. And his dad they had a Hudson, hence the Hudson River and the Anatomy of Peace. His dad had sold a Hudson, which had been barely held together, and bought a brand new 1952 8-cylinder Plymouth. Okay? About a week later, Farrell he didn't have a driver's license, right? 14, going on 15. Goes to his dad. One night, Dad's sitting in the bed reading the newspaper, smoking a cigarette, and Farrell turns to his dad, Charles, and says, "Can I borrow the car? I got a big day tonight." Dad says, "That'd be fine. You've been careful with the Hudson. You've been great with the truck." So Farrell's excited, grabs the keys to this new car, runs outside, starts it up. It's an automatic, so he puts it in reverse, backs it around, puts it in drive to go forward, and he realizes the fuel tank's nearly empty. Okay? So he puts it in neutral and runs back in the cabin because he knows he doesn't have enough money. So he goes in the cabin. He says, "Dad," he says, "What's up?" He says, I need a few more bucks. The gas is really low. I can't get, So he gives him $3 or $4, and I'm sure that'll fill the tank, right? In 1952. So anyway, Farrell runs back outside the cabin, but the car's not there. It was just on a little bit of an incline, and just quietly, when he ran back in the cabin, he hadn't put it in park, he put it in neutral, didn't set the brake, and so just really quietly started going forward. Picked up speed, and he was in the cabin. When he got out, looked at us, not there, and he looks up, see the tracks, sees the taillights go over the cliff. 80 feet to the Virgin River. So mad. He said, but I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe it got caught on a twig. So I run over there and I look down, you know how you go up? And I look down and I see it smashed into a tree right at River's edge. And he said, I just got sick. If I had any dinner, I'd have been throwing it up, but I got dry heaves. And I'm sure the poor kid is in shock. You know, he's not quite 15. He said, I thought about running away. He said, but everybody in Washington County knows me, I'm not going to get anywhere. So I better go on up to this. So he walks back in the cabin. There's his dad sitting up in bed, reading a newspaper, smoking a cigarette. And he looks up and says, what now? Can you imagine having to deliver this message? Farrell said, I just let the car roll in the river and it was completely destroyed. He said, my dad sat there for a moment, reached over and turned a page in the newspaper, looked up at me and said, well, I guess you'll have to take the truck. And then he said, I did. And we got the keys to the truck and I took off. He said, I don't know. He said, I do not know if my father pulled his hair out and screamed and ranted and raved and beat in the walls and cursed and did everything in the world that he was known to do. I don't know if he did that after that. But he never said another thing. In fact, his father never said another thing. None of us knew the story. He never told anybody. He said, yeah, the car got destroyed last night. And that's all he ever told anybody. Never said that Farrell had anything to do with that. So his own brothers, when Farrell went to his dad's funeral and asked to speak, he tells the story. His own brothers didn't know the story. Dad never told. He paid cash for the car. Farrell said, I got down the road in the truck. And all of a sudden I couldn't drive. Because I realized my dad loved me more than Pop. He said I pulled over and sobbed for a while. Thought I'd better go home because I looked pretty bad. But then I made a resolution in my life. He said, on the worst day of my life, my father did not make things worse. He made them better. That's the kind of dad I want to be. Okay? Wow. I get to be his son. But I take from him probably one of the major lessons in my life. And I wished I had known it that night at the dinner table. On the worst day of anyone's life, I want to hope things go right, not make matters worse for them.
I love that last thing he says. He talks about on the worst day of that kid's life, his dad helps make things go better, and that's really what I strive to do in my practice as a professional, as well as a wife and a mom. I have a 2-year-old son, and as I interact with mentors and with colleagues and even with students, I always want to make their lives go a little bit better, and I want to value them more than the problem. So hopefully you guys have been asking, how do we obtain a heart of peace? Hopefully that's been in your mind. The first way is to notice those red flags of justification. Notice how you're feeling about yourself, how you're feeling about others, how you're viewing the world. Notice those things. And then you find an out-of-box space. So the gentleman that just spoke, that's what he was talking about. That's his out-of-box space that he goes to. How many of you guys have seen Happy Gilmore? Yeah, I kind of think of it, find your happy place, right? Find a space where you're content with who you are. That way and the space where you can calm down and really get collected. Ponder the situation anew. This is really looking at the situation in a new light. Putting yourself in those people's shoes. How are you affecting them? What are you doing? Looking inward How am I adding to this conflict? And then action. You've got to do something about it. You've got to work at it. You've got to fix it. You've got to move forward. And this is how we stay out of the box, out of those boxes of justification. How often do you feel in your lives that you're always dealing with things that are going wrong? You're always putting out fires. I do, quite often. Have any of you guys ever felt that way? Yes? Yes? So, really, I feel the moral of the book and the concepts in this book, it's to help things go right. And that's really what I try to do in my practice as the coordinator. I want to help things go right. And so, you'll find that the solution to your problem starts at the bottom of this pyramid, right? So if we're in the box, we need to get out of the box. We need to obtain a heart of peace. The next way to help things go right is to build a relationship with those that you're in the conflict with and those who you're interacting with. Why do you guys think building that relationship with the person you're in a conflict with would help things go right?
Trust.
Trust?
Trust you more.
That's great.
Open up more.
Yeah. You allow those barriers to come down and that communication to flow. How many of you guys have ever listened to or read 7 Habits for Highly Effective People? So Stephen Covey talks about seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that, especially as a mentor, right? We're in a mentoring class. This is key to helping things go right. And then the next step is to teach and communicate. So once you understand, you can move to understood. By really focusing on these in a conflict, I guarantee it goes tons better, and you can help things go right in other people's lives. And just to wrap up so I can leave some time for questions, this is a quote that I found by Thomas S. Monson. It says, "Never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved." And that's so important, especially as mentors. We oftentimes get so wrapped up in what we have to do and who we have to help that we forget that we're helping people. And if we can always keep this in mind, always see people as people and have a heart of peace, we'll be able to help things go right. And that's all I have. Thanks for letting me come. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, feedback? That's not your weekly reflection, but. Josh.
No, I appreciate you doing this. It's always good to come back to reality and see things with the right eyes, because you don't get this really anywhere else. Not a whole lot of people live it. I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but it's just difficult. It's difficult to do so. I appreciate you sharing this again.
Thank you. Well, and it's so easy for us. I mean, I know in my life, we're always thinking, especially as students, right? This time is an opportunity for you guys to be selfish, right? And we get so consumed with what we have to do during the day that I know I forget that maybe talking with Darren or with Josh or with John, they're actually people, right? They're not things I have to get done, right? They're people. So, thank you. John, did you have something?
I mean, it kind of makes me think about the law class that I took in high school and stuff like that, and how with situations like that or in politics, it's never about understanding where the other person's argument is and where they're coming from. It's always about, well, how can I discredit them, or how can I just make myself right? And I feel like, a lot of times there's almost kind of like an admiration of people who are always able to get people on their side and stuff like that. It's just weird to me, because when you think about it, it doesn't really produce anything.
Right.
Like it might get people rallied behind something, But, I mean, at the same time, is it anything constructive, or is it just tearing people apart? Like, one of my least favorite things in the world is Samsung Galaxy commercials, because it makes everybody who has an iPhone look like a retard, you know? And because of that, like, it makes me hate the product.
Right.
Because it's so divisive and it's so negative, you know? And it's just like, you know, it just makes me think, is that worth it? Is having that small little bit of validation worth getting people to bring each other down?
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, John. So, as John was talking, it sparked a comment. So I had you guys write down maybe a conflict that you're going through right now or think about. Maybe Darren can make this a weekly reflection, or just take time to do it on your own. But I want you guys to think about, and we'll post this on Canvas so you guys can go back to it. But think about maybe in this conflict, what boxes are you in? And think about ways that you can actually help this go right, help this conflict go right, and make a valiant stab at making this conflict go right. So any other questions? I think I'm out of time, but any other questions or feedback? Yes?
Do you, as mentors, do you see a lot of conflict between mentors and students, or just mentors and bosses?
So Dylan's question was, as mentors, do we see conflict arise between students and mentors? And the answer is yes, we do. I know a lot of times, I work specifically with team leads, and there's conflict. We have a time during our team lead meeting that we talk about any feedback or concerns, and oftentimes it's conflict that's going on. There's oftentimes conflict between teachers and mentors, or even instructors and students that the mentor has to help advocate for and facilitate sort of helping that go right. So,
or even between mentors and the leadership.
Yeah, I've had conflicts with some of my mentors before where it's been pretty nasty, but we've been able to work through it, right? Because of these concepts, we've been able to work through it. Not everybody agrees with me all the time, unfortunately. Any other questions? I don't have Twix for you guys, sorry.
We'll make this the reflection, so you'll have the opportunity to kind of follow through with Gretchen's invitation, and you can think about the boxes that you're in, and then you can choose to disclose whatever you feel is appropriate. Anything that you share is going to be only read by me, and maintain confidence is always there, or confidentiality rather. But whatever you feel comfortable sharing is entirely up to you, but it'll be an opportunity for you to face the conflict that you're dealing with, or one of the conflicts you might be dealing with, and process that.
So thanks for letting me come and crash your class. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing most of you next week and reading your applications. So thank you again.
You're up for our feedback. And again, we talked about facilitation and then obviously conflict, which we've been talking about kind of throughout this week with our one-on-ones as well.
Okay. So I missed the first little bit of class, so I wasn't really sure what you guys talked about there, but it was like some candy was involved. I'm excited for you. A little jealous, to be honest. Kind of leads into one of them boxes that we talked about, and jealousy, kind of just stuck in there. I really liked how we talked about how John mentioned how we can get to a point where you take that ultimate superiority kind of stance, and you're like, you know what? Everything I do is pretty validated at this point because they deserve it, or they're once you start making them be that object, it's like anything goes.